Welcome to Chat, Communications, Happenings, and Trends, with your host, Amanda Cumming, and producer, Janet Louise Meyer. Thank you for listening.
So hi, welcome to Chat, Communications, Happenings, and Trends, and we're continuing our discussion today about UBI with Scott Santens. So Scott, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So first off, Scott, what is UBI?
Sure. UBI stands for Unconditional Basic Income or Universal Basic Income. And it's an investment in people with a dividend that is unconditional, it's universal, it's sufficient to cover basic needs, and it's in the form of cash. It's regularly provided, and it is done without any kind of work requirement or any kind of bureaucracy. It's the creation of a floor. It's saying that instead of starting each month with $0, you start each month with, say, $1,000.
So Scott, you have written a few articles, and an article that I looked at recently was in Medium. It's titled "The Monsters Inc. Argument for Unconditional Basic Income." And in the article, you mentioned a couple points, and one of those is about wage slavery. So could you explain that a little bit better for me?
Sure. So I think we all recognize what slavery is. You know, we can say that slavery is having no choice but to do work for someone else. So it essentially only benefits them. You have no choice in the matter. You're not free to say no to that. And then we switch to this system, and we used to talk about it a lot more, actually, to the wage system. And really the problem is that the wage system as we know it is essentially a form of slavery as long as you cannot refuse to do that. So it's the same issue of being unable to say no to someone, in which case you're not bargaining together in, say, a free market for labor. You're someone saying, "Hey, I'll pay you $5 an hour or whatever," and because $5 an hour is better than nothing, then you have to say yes. And that's where the minimum wages come into this, is that, the government says, well, you can't live with $5 an hour, so we're going to bump it up to, $7.50 or whatever an hour. And it's just, all of this comes from the fact that we essentially do not have the ability to refuse to work. And I think when it comes to any kind of consent, that's essential to actual consent. You could look at just at sex itself and be like, can you consent to that if you have, like, say, if you're gagged or if you have the inability to move or say no of any kind, then no one's going to say that that's a consensual encounter. It's the same way with like the wage labor market. It's just fundamental that you have to be able to refuse to work in order for it to be voluntary.
And so because you're basically arguing that we can't refuse to work because we actually have to survive and meet all of our basic needs, we therefore are forced into the labor market even if we don't want to be.
Yeah. And another part of this too is that this whole condition is essentially unnatural, let's say, as well. Because if you go back far enough, before the invention of private property, then you could just, pick up nuts and go gathering and hunt and say there were, like, free caves or whatnot, but there wasn't like a monetary system imposed on this. And so you could live on your own through the fruits of your own labor, and you didn't really have to put a whole lot of work into it because the stuff was free and you just have to find it and eat it, and that was survival. So we changed that. And so now that bare existence for survival has a price. Like, we're the only species on the planet that has to pay for their existence. It's like that was something we imposed. So we created the system where existence has a price, and then we say, well, in order to obtain that money to live, you have to work for someone else. And then if you do like sufficient work and the type of work for the right people, then you're allowed to live. So the whole system is just not natural, and it's involuntary.
Another thing that you mentioned in the article, which I found kind of interesting, was that you applied this idea of employment and I guess UBI onto Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Could you kind of explain that a little bit better and kind of like why you made that comparison?
Yeah, I think it's really effective in understanding what basic income is to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And for those who are unfamiliar with this, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is essentially looking at all of our needs in like a pyramid structure, where at the bottom are your most basic needs. Like everybody needs to eat and have shelter and sleep, and these like basic physiological needs are at the bottom. It's the most fundamental. It's the first thing you require. But then after you meet those needs, of course you have other needs. There, security and the need for companionship and the need for, say, purpose and to improve oneself. There are all these other needs that people have. So that's why when everyone who eats and is not homeless, everyone who has their basic needs met, that's not the only thing that they're doing. It's not like, well, we got those needs covered, we're done. It's just everyone has more needs than just your basic needs. And I would even argue that those needs are even more important than your basic needs, because you don't see a whole lot of people killing themselves because they can't find food. You commit suicide because you can commit suicide because you're not getting anything but your basic needs met. It's like, what is your purpose in life? It's not just to eat and sleep. It's to have friends and to feel that you're doing something that's important, and to give to others and to be connected to others. Those are your important needs. So it's important to, I think, look at basic income through that perspective, because again, you're building a floor where everyone's basic needs are met, and then with those basic needs met, you are able to pursue all these other things in a much more capable way than just living lives, which so many people are doing right now, where all they're trying to do is meet their basic needs.
So where do you think that UBI fits into the broader context of a workers' movement? And I mean, do you think it does definitely have a place in a workers' movement? And are there any attempts to try to integrate it into those movements?
Oh, absolutely. I think the workers' movement, even the union movement, labor movement, requires basic income as part of its future. Because here we're going into an automated future, and that's going to happen. And it does not make sense to fight to keep jobs that a machine can do, especially if it can do it cheaper and better, more effectively. I think that the goal should be to I think the goal should be full unemployment instead of full employment. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that UBI is anti-worker. It's you need to look at this as we should have choice in the work that we do. We should have choice of the work that we do, not only in paid work, which is we classically think of jobs as being, but also as unpaid work. And so by having a basic income, then you're able to pursue the work that is most meaningful to you. You're able to not only say no to the work that doesn't pay enough, that you don't want to do, maybe even you consider to be harmful for even to exist, but you can say yes to work that's far more meaningful, and maybe it doesn't pay as much, but thanks to the basic income, then you're actually able to prosper in a way that you can't right now. Or maybe you can even do unpaid work, which you're basically doing unpaid work right now. It's just something that people can do if they can afford to do it. It's like a luxury for a lot of people that you can perform unpaid work. And it should not be a luxury. Every worker, every person who wants to do some valuable work should be able to do that. So I think it's important to also see that not only is the power to say no, but it's also the power to say yes. And as far as unions are involved, really the power of unions comes from the power to say no. Essentially, that's what the strike is it's saying we will refuse to work, and unless you meet our demands, then we're going to continue not working. If you want this to end, then give us what we need and we'll start to work again. So basic income is essentially that on an individual level. It allows people to refuse to work until what their demands are met. In that case, you can see it as strengthening unions. You can actually empower unions in a way that they can't do right now. And in fact, you can even see it as like an unlimited strike fund. So right now, in order to go on strike, you have to have the resources available. You have to fund it. You have to get this money, enough money, and then you have to basically win the strike before you run out of the money. Basic income is essentially an unlimited strike fund for everybody, and I think it's a huge bonus to the labor movement. So I think they need to look at that, and also I think the labor movement too just needs to really start to look at work the way that they traditionally did, which is, we have the 40-hour work week. We have the 8-hour day because of the labor movement. Because at one point they wanted to get the work down. It was important. Not only the working hours are important, but hours of leisure were important. So here we are automating all of this stuff. We have technologies that are enabling us to do more and more with less and less. I think we need to get back to that. And we need to get back to say, let's push for a 4-hour day. Let's push for a 20-hour week. Like, let's reduce the amount of work that we're doing, because then it also enables everybody to be employed. It's sharing the available work more than what we have right now. This idea that half of people are going to be out of work in 20 years is kind of silly when you think that if we all worked half as much, then we'd all be just as employed as we are now. So I think that needs to be an element of this, the workers' movement going into the future as well.
Let's talk about the people that object to UBI. One of the arguments that you will often hear is, well, how do we pay for it? And I know that you mentioned earlier about kind of doing a cost-benefit analysis, kind of like it will reduce the crime rate, can potentially make people healthier because they would be able to have they would be able to afford resources like food. Is there anything else that you could kind of that you use to kind of convince people that are just like, this is just impossible to pay for?
Yeah, so I call this the napkin math argument, where someone will just do some quick multiplication and say, oh, well, the cost of basic income is the amount of basic income times the total amount of people receiving it, and voila, that's the amount. But that's not at all the way that you calculate the cost of a basic income. So the biggest misunderstanding here is that this is a program that everyone pays, but also everyone receives. So it's essentially everyone is receiving some version or some amount of it as a refund. So you've got net payers and net receivers. A way of thinking about this too is that, if you pay $10 to receive a $20 bill, what is the cost of that? Did you pay $10 or did you receive $10? Well, say that you received $10 from this because that's your net. So the cost of basic income is the net amount, which is the total minus the amount received. When you look at it that way, then let's say a $12,000 per year basic income, where you'd also provide $4,000 to each child under 18. That amount is not over $3 trillion. The amount is actually around $900 billion. So you're already at a fraction of that kind of napkin math amount. That's the amount. 900 billion is effectively the amount that you're moving from the top to the bottom and middle. But then, of course, you also have to look at, what programs are we getting rid of? What programs are we not getting rid of, but actually people don't qualify for anymore because they're earning enough money that they're no longer, considered in need for that program. This gets into the details of how do we want to design this. And But any way you look at it, there's more than a few $100 billion that you abstract from that as well. So in the U.S., when I'm asked about the cost, then realistically it's about $300 to $600 billion, depending on the decisions that we make. And of course, that's essentially, $300 billion is 1/10 of this napkin math cost of $3 trillion that people will say that makes it entirely unrealistic. Here we are. We can spend like an extra $100 billion on the military in the snap of our fingers. Apparently, it's like, oh, our military is failing. It's falling apart, even though we're spending more than the next 7 or 8 countries combined or something. So we have the resources to do this stuff. It's just a matter of the will to do it.
It kind of sounds like a MMT argument. Like it's a matter of choice, not the lack of resources. Having said that, what about the argument that you probably often hear about, well, this is just going to make people really lazy and no longer, I don't know, whatever lazy it can be interpreted as far as the work is concerned?
Yeah, so I think that is based off, again, it's a misunderstanding of basic income. And it's like it comes from, I think, those who equate basic income with welfare. So those are two very different concepts. I say welfare is paying people to do nothing. Basic income is paying people to do anything. Like there's a difference there between those things. And as I touched upon before, welfare is based off this, it's conditionality. So you're saying that if you are earning under, say, $12,000 per year, then we will give you this benefit. But if you start earning more than $12,000 per year, then we'll remove it. So you are setting a condition on essentially not working. And it's not to say that people don't actually work under welfare. It's just saying that the incentives are not aligned for work. You're essentially punishing work because you're pulling benefits away with work. With basic income, because it's never withdrawn, that means all work pays. You are not punished for work. So let's say with a welfare system, you're receiving $20,000 in total benefits. And then someone offers you a job that pays $15,000. Well, you would think that you should then be earning $35,000. But with the welfare system, it says, well, no, you have a job now, so let's pull away all this money. And it can even get rid of essentially all of it. So then you've got $15,000 working 40 hours per week, and you had $20,000. So it's just a very sane calculation to say, well, this is a worse deal. Why would I do that? Why would I accept this job under those details? So basic income says, look, you're starting every month with $1,000, and no matter how much you earn doing any amount of work, part-time job, a temp job, if your wage is $7 an hour or if your wage is $20 an hour, no matter what it is, it adds to the floor so that you're always better off working, in which case you've removed the disincentive to work that a conditional system creates. So just from that understanding, you can see that UBI is a pro-work policy, and also it enables unpaid work in a way that nothing else does. It's the only program that says, hey, I see that you're doing all this care work and we value that because, it's an important job that's not recognized as a job. Basic income says, here, thank you for that work, and we want people to be able to pursue this unpaid work. So it's very much pro-work. And in fact, the evidence is really interesting in support of it as well. So this is like a recent analysis of the Alaska dividend, which is actually, I would say, the closest example of basic income in the world, where it's everybody receives this amount, rich or poor, adult or kid even, everyone receives this. And it's not enough to be called a full basic income. So we call it a partial basic income. It's not quite there, but it's it could be $2,000 per year instead of $12,000 per year. But $2,000 per year for 5 people, you're looking at $10,000. it could be a chunk of change for a family, and it's with no conditions whatsoever. So everyone in Alaska has this small floor. So you would think, well, because that they have at least some extra money, that there would be less need to work, right? Even if it's a small amount, just any amount means there's less need. Well, the result is that part-time employment post the beginning of the dividend in 1982 has resulted in a 17% increase in part-time employment, and there's been no effect in the full-time employment. So it actually enables people to I think it's especially pro part-time work. It works better that way because the existing system kind of disincentivizes part-time work. So it makes sense that they would actually help in that regard.
So where do you see UBI as a principle or anything like that moving to? Do you think that it's a realistic expectation that it can and will be implemented in your lifetime, or do you project that it's probably going to be a lot longer than that?
Oh, I think this is going to happen sooner than people think. And I think a lot of it will depend, too, on which country does it first. So that's a really interesting question in itself. Who will be first? I think Canada might be at the top right now as far as being the closest. They're in the middle of a 3-year, or not the middle, but they're in the first year of a 3-year experiment. They're testing this in Ontario in a few different cities. And so Canada could be the first ones to do this. What happens if Canada does that? Which other countries, it's the same thing with like universal health care. Someone had to do it first, and then other countries looked at this and said, that works. Let's do that too. Let's figure out how we can change things and how we can adapt it for our own country. What's the best way to go about that? I think you'll see the same thing, that there will be the first country to do it, and other countries will look at it and adapt it for their own countries, and it'll spread. And it will all be evidence towards the other countries who haven't done it yet. They'll say, oh, wow, look at this. It improved productivity. It lowered crime. It lowered, increased health outcomes. It improved education. Like all these effects you'll see will just lead to it being more important for the others to implement. And of course, all of this is existing within this sphere of automation as well. And I think that we're already being affected by automation. I would argue that Trump is president largely because of the fact that we automated so many things, that technology enabled us to offshore things that we wouldn't be able to offshore otherwise. And we didn't look at who was losing out. We just said, well, there's a net general benefit that things get cheaper, economies improve, productivity improves, and so that's good. But we didn't look at the fact that there are definitely losers in this system, that there are people whose lives are being made worse off because of the way that we're doing things without acknowledging the effects. So this is only going to increase, and just the way technology works is exponential. And I don't think we're really used to thinking of that as humans, that this it's going to grow faster and faster and faster. And I think it will just shock people about what we'll be capable of in even just 5 years. I mean, we've seen incredible advances in artificial intelligence through deep learning algorithms just since 2012. And so here, that was just 60 years ago. What's going to happen in the next 60 years? I think that we're going to see some serious things happening in the early 2020s, and by the mid 2020s. I think that if countries already don't have a basic income, it'll be a lot more of a serious issue.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely imagine that United States would probably be the last on the list to implement anything like that, which would lead to a huge worker crisis here. But I mean, we're kind of already experiencing a lot of that. We're experiencing the deterioration of the continued deterioration of worker rights, and a lot of those things. So
yeah, I'll just add at the same time that I think the U.S. is really interesting because we do have a we're the United States, and Hawaii has already been the first state to actually pass something that was pro basic income, saying that economic security was a right of every resident of Hawaii. And so they're actually looking at basic income, and they'll either say pilot it or adapt it in some form in Hawaii. And I think that other states are going to follow suit as well, just like we've seen with marijuana legalization across the country. I think same thing with gay rights. I think that you'll see this state by state. There'll be something that people can do to implement basic income in some form. And so I wouldn't count the U.S. out as far as being the last to do this. We may be the first to do it in smaller areas.
That's interesting. So, Scott, is there anything else you would like to add to the discussion today?
I guess I just want to emphasize. I guess I'd like to emphasize how many people are left out of the existing system, and just the costs, not economic costs, but say human and emotional costs of the existing system. And I think it's important that people recognize really the details that I think people assume that our safety net works in a way that we think that it should. But I implore people to look into this, and it does not work the way that you think it does. We've got a system where, just look at the way disability works, and you've got millions of people waiting on average over 2 years to be approved by, say, a court essentially system saying that, oh, we recognize that you're disabled. And during that so for 2 years, you can't work, because if you earn income, you're obviously not disabled, right? So you are forced to not work essentially for 2 years, and you have to prove that you're disabled enough, which also means that if you have a disability that is not covered in this, which if you look at the US, say 1 out of 5 people have a disability in the US, and of the people with a disability, 1 out of 5 people are receiving disability assistance. So you've got the system where 4 out of 5 people with a disability can wait years to receive an income that they will then be punished for if they earn additional income on top of it. So it's just the whole system is just so messed up. And I just wish people would look more into this and see how important it would be to actually build an unconditional income floor underneath everybody, no matter what, so that these systems do not end up causing the harm that they do. And it does not mean that we have to then get rid of everything else. It's just saying that you have to guarantee at least some amount, because that would really be transformative for just so many people all around the world.
Okay, great. So we just spoke with Scott Santens about UBI. So Scott, again, thank you so much for speaking with us today. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
You just listened to another episode of Chat, Communications, Happenings, and Trends. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Also, head on over to our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/ActifyChat and help us bring more content to you by supporting us. Thank you, and keep fighting the good fight, my friends.